Hello, I'm Carly, and as you can tell, I'm a Texan who has been cruelly separated from my accent by visa restrictions. But I've been in Glasgow for nearly 10 years now, and I thought I had this whole living in Scotland thing down until last week. I had a meeting with a student and we were talking about her essay, and I said something, I put it in parentheses, and this look of just utter confusion comes across her face. And I'm like, I put it in parentheses? Nothing. Confusion. Apparently this was a cultural exchange moment. I'm like, okay, what do you call the things that look like this? And she goes, brackets. I'm like, oh shit, okay, processing. All right, so then what do you call the ones that look like this? She said, square brackets. Oh, goodness. So then, of course, we've just lost all traction on talking about her essay, and we're completely sidelined. So what do you call the really fancy looking ones? You know the ones I'm talking about. I don't have a name for them because I don't use them. Squiggly brackets. And she wasn't sure if that was just a Scottish thing or a legit thing, so we looked it up, and no, that's actually one of Google says good, so I'm still processing that. But many of the people that you'll see on the stage tonight are scientists, and when I say science, I mean like really what you think of when you think of science, like maths and physics and computer science. And I'm just surrounded by scientists. Even my older sister and my younger sister are scientists. Older sister's a GP, younger sister's an oncology pharmacist. I am the slacker child with my PhD in Celtic. So really what that means is that I'm just trying to sneak my way into the science festival. But I like to go, but fear not, or perhaps fear very much, because I have a master's of science in medieval history. And what that meant was I spent quite a lot of time tying coconuts to swallows with pieces of string and then trying to measure their airspeed velocity. But really, as a historian, I should not be allowed around mathematics. Historians are terrible at mathematics. I'll give you an example. Do you remember learning about the 100 Years' War in school? Yeah? It's 116 years long. As the historian's going, good enough. And if you read a history book, right before the dates, it has a lowercase c with a full stop, and that means circa in Latin, which means around. So if King Brady of the Picts died circa 586, that's just historians going, yeah, good enough. And the last example for that I have this evening is myself. I had to do algebra for my doctoral thesis. And I honestly think that making an arts and humanities student do algebra should be against the Geneva Conventions. You may wonder, why did you have to do algebra as your doctoral thesis in Celtic? Well, I needed to talk about the potential original height and width of fragmentary monumental crosses and cross slabs. And so I had to figure out what the average height and width of cross slabs that are fully surviving was, and then apply that to my research. And in order to do this, I had to ask my best friend for help and watch a YouTube video on it circa 7 times. But other research that I got to do for my PhD involved toponymic analysis, which is really just a fancy way of saying that I looked at place names and what they mean and what they can tell us about what happened there in the past. And I mostly looked at ecclesiastical place names because I'm interested in monastic networks. So that means lots of place names in Kill. And I'm not talking about murder. So Kill means church. So if you run into place names like Kilmalloig or Kildonnan, you're talking about the Church of Malloig or the Church of Donnan, although Donnan was later killed. Yeah. And I got to see some other interesting place names, so I'm going to share a few of them with you. The first one is Entronrauer, or Stranraer, which means the fat nose. And indeed, there are body parts strewn all across the landscape of Scotland. You've got Drum, or spines or backs, as in Drum Alban, the spine of Britain, which divides Scotland into its eastern and western watersheds. There are loads of lochs with heads all across the country, like Ken Loch Gilp or Loch Gilp Head. And my favourite is that there are even buttocks. So we've got Tonrigeth or Tonrigo, or Arse to the Wind. And these are just the Gaelic place names. So I find myself these days, as I'm traveling across the country, just kind of staring at any place name signs that I find and trying to figure out what their elements mean. Which means it's probably a good thing I don't drive. Yeah. And is this a good time to tell you that I've spent the last 4 years as a research associate for an oyster habitat project? Oh, it's true. It's the first job that I ever got after doing my PhD. And my parents were understandably confused when I broke the good news to them. They said, "Did you not just spend 4 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars studying medieval Scotland?" And I said, "Yes." But you know, it's how I get to be in the sciences, right? So I get to take all of this time that I've spent with these place names and thinking about how ridiculous they can be, and being part of the site selection process until the real scientists show up, and then they can decide whether or not oysters are still there or if the habitat is still good for oysters. And, you know, let me just come and eat some oysters alongside them. It's great. But I want to call back a little bit to a bit more of maths and history, because it's a pain I have to get off my chest. It's not always our fault that we are terrible at maths, because what you may not realize is that sometimes people in the past made shit up. And as my example, I want to share with you some of the Irish annals. You know, that's ANNALS, two N's. Not what you were thinking, no. And in the Irish annals, well, specifically the Annals of Ulster, which were very cleverly named because they tended to talk about events in the part of Ireland that was historically called Ulster, they would mostly just write down the things that were interesting enough to them to be worth putting quill to parchment for round about their time. But the very first entry in the Annals of Ulster is in 431, when they talk about Palladius being sent to the Irish to be the first bishop of Ireland. I'm pretty sure Patrick would not have been happy to hear that. In 432, we have Patrick turning up in the Annals. Now he's come to Ireland. But the monk has said that this was computed by Bede. Wait a minute. Bede is an English monk who lived in England in the 7th and 8th centuries. So my maths is maybe not the best, but if I'm a monk living in 432, it would be really hard for me to write about Bede computing something. So now we're suspicious, right? And then in 434, we have the monks talking about the first prey of the Saxons from or to Ireland. Now, these are very different things, from or to. Like, I'm not an English major, but very different. We know that the Saxons are not from Ireland, so the question would be, when and how did they get to Ireland to be praying from Ireland? And the fact that the monk wrote from or to Ireland means he's got no fucking clue. And academics argue about whether or not these annals become contemporary, by which we mean the monks are writing about current events, in the mid-6th or the late 7th century. So when I read about the birth of St. Covgall in the annals in 516, and then again in 520, I know for sure they don't have any fucking clue. But that's what it's like being a historian, is we have to go, is this real? Is this right? I mean, we read so much craziness as medieval historians, whether it's magical pea fountains being created or the flying severed arms of medieval saints. No, really, those are two things that I got to write about in my thesis. Or mermaids. It's amazing we're connected to this reality at all. So if you notice me just kind of standing, staring vaguely off into the distance, maybe in the direction of a place name sign, don't worry. It's just your local medievalist oyster habitat research doing my daily business. Thanks very much.